Okay, thank you, Ludovic, and good afternoon, everyone from Yangon. So, in this webinar sessions today, this is the third webinars as a part of Emergency WAS online course. And we are going to talk more on the household water treatment systems. And today's agenda, there are 5 topics. And I will cover the first and the second topics and part of the third topics. And Wendy is going to talk on the fourth and the fifth topic. So today's agenda, we are going to talk about what is the household water treatment and safe storage. What does it mean with multi-barrier approach? And we are going also to discuss briefly different methods that are available for the household water treatments, and actually how and when to roll out the household water treatment programs and different resources. So what is the household water treatment? So there are two, I would say that there are two important points regarding the household water treatment. The household water treatment is an activity to improve water quality and is undertaken at the household level. Because it's undertaken at the household level, so we are not only talking about the technologies, but the most important things that we are talking about the practices and processes. And if you remember from the previous webinars regarding the water supply, the household water treatment has a similar process with centralized drinking water treatments. And what is safe water storage? Here there are 2 points that we have also to remember, is the physical and software component. The safe water storage is the use of clean containers with covers. So here we are talking about physical things and a good hygiene behaviors, which means that we are talking about the software components. Why do we need safe water storage? The safe water storage is important because it prevents contaminations during water collections, transport, storage in the home. As you can see from the pictures, there are 4 different pictures. And you can also see that the water can be contaminated at the source, during the traveling from sources to home, and water also can be contaminated at the house level. And I've already mentioned a little bit regarding the centralized water supply systems. And what is actually the difference between the household water treatment, which is at the point of use, and centralized water supply? So, as you might be aware from the previous webinar sessions, that in the Red Cross, we have a multiple WAS disaster response kits that are mobiles. So we have kit number 2, kit number 5, kit number 10, ERU Watson modules number 15, ERU Watson module number 40, and MSM 20. And all this kit is ready to be deployed to disaster areas. And all this kit is based on the semi-centralized supply and purifications. So what are the difference? So the point of use in the principles, that is the end users. So it means that the household or communities are doing the treatments at the household levels. Semi-centralized is the operators or staff who are operating the mobile water treatments. And what are the technologies? For the point of use, we have a sedimentations, coagulation, disinfections, boiling, and SODIS. SODIS is a solar disinfections. And in the semi-centralized, the technology is the treatment units. It's also similar in the treatment units. Maybe you still remember that you have also a sedimentation unit, coagulation, flocculation unit, and disinfection units. And what are the advantages? For the point of use or the household water treatment, we can consider is low cost. And then compared to semi-centralized supplies, which is much more expensive. But for the semi-centralized supplies, they are ready to use and very effective. What does it mean with the very effective is that we can treat quite a large amount of waters during the short time. For example, if we are talking a mobile water treatment plant, so we can treat like 4 cubic meters per hour, 20 cubic meters per hour. And the disadvantages for the point of use is that the responsibility lies on the end of users. So the effectiveness of the treatment is really depends on how end of users performs the treatments. And disadvantages for the semi-centralized supply is expensive, and we have also to know how to operate and maintain. And what is the pros and cons of point of use? As I mentioned before, that for the household water treatments is relatively inexpensive and is independent from a centralized system, which means that we can reach a more dispersed community, and it can be rapidly deployed. It improves microbial water quality and reduce contamination risks between treatment and use. It has a wide range of simple low-cost technologies. For the cons, I've already also mentioned that the responsibility is really depends on household level. And for the household water treatment system, it's quite difficult to monitor the correct operation and maintenance of technologies. Each household should be provided with knowledge on operation and maintenance of the system. Why we call it its cons? Because the operation and training the household on the operation of maintenance of the household water system is very intensive and also very expensive, because it's really depends on the responsibility of household, depend on the operation, the knowledge. So the treated waters may be lower qualities than a well-designed, operated, and maintained community systems. So when do we roll out the household water treatment? There are different stages during the emergency. Before, just right emergency, and then transitional phase and reconstruction phase. So when do we roll out this household water treatment? Let's talk about the pre-event or before the emergency. Usually during these phases, what we can do for the household water treatment and storage is that we stock all the materials for the household water treatment and storage, and we collect also the informations on the local capacities related to the household water treatments. So what does it mean is, with the capacity, it means user awareness, availability of local implementers, or also availability of the trainers. And promotions, building awareness regarding this household water treatment also can be conduct during these phases before the emergency. And then when the emergency happened, so in the first few days after an emergency, the household water treatment is not encouraged. Why? Because usually the efforts that made during this phase is much more on the rescue and saving of life. And the first response during the initial relief is much more on getting and treating large quantity of water quickly. So then from the initial relief, we are talking now to a transitional phase. And it can be starting from 10 days after the event of disaster up until 6 weeks. It might be possible to introduce household water treatment during this phase, especially if there is an existing or prior knowledge on the household water treatments. And moving on the reconstruction phase, this is also another feasible entry point for us to introduce a household water treatment and to implement the household water treatment, especially if water supply, such as water tracking, will not continue, or it will stop during this phase. Let's talk now a little bit on household water treatment and SPEAR. So this is just a quick recap on the SPEAR handbook guideline relating to water supply standard. And all of you might be aware that it has been also covered during the first and second webinar. So for access and water quantity, everyone knows that minimum is 15 liters per person per day. For drinking, cooking, and personal hygiene needs, water source is located less than 500 meters, and queuing times at the water source should be less than 30 minutes. And talking about the water qualities, so this is the difference between, and this is the new SPEAR standard, that the water should have less than 10 colony forming units per 100 milliliter fecal coliform, and this is in particular for unchlorinated waters. And there is no negative effect on health, especially on short-term use of waters that contaminated by chemicals. So these include carryover of treatment chemicals, so the treatment by using of chemicals, or radiological source. There is no outbreak of waterborne and water-related disease. And all water treatment options used that are effective for improving water qualities has to be accompanied by appropriate training, promotion, and monitoring. And all affected people drink water from a protected and treated source. And how about the water facilities? You may also know that at least each household should have 2 clean water collecting containers. So 1 for storage and 1 for transportation. And these water container should have a narrow neck or cover for buckets or other safe means of storage. And regarding other wash facilities, there should be minimum 1 washing basin per 100 people. and private laundering and bathing areas available for women with enough water. We should also make sure that water at the household level is free from contamination at all times. And people are satisfied with the adequate facilities. They have enough water for collection, storage, bathings, hand washing, and laundry. There should be also regular maintenance of the installed system. And we have also to ensure that users are involved in all these facilities. And these are essential standards that we must aim during our wash intervention. And most of these interventions could also include distribution of wash items, such as chlorine tablets, pure sachet, and etc. And how about in the SPEAR standard, there is a specific sections related to the household water treatment system and storage. There are 4 points, so that the use of household water treatment is, we use a household water treatment systems when a centrally operated system is not possible. We have to work with the other sectors to agree household fuel requirement and access for boiling water. Avoid introducing an unfamiliar water treatment option in time of crisis and in time of epidemics. And effective use of the household water treatment and storage options requires a regular follow-up, support, and monitoring. And the most important things regarding the household water treatment system and storage is no distribution without training. We cannot really stress enough that there should be no distribution without training. So no one should be given household water treatment items without the means and training to use them. Why? Because the large-scale distribution of household water treatment products are expensive. It's also time-consuming. So if people don't use the product or don't use them properly, we are wasting the money. And what is worse is that if affected people may be drinking unsafe water and risk illness and possibly death. And let's take also a moment for the F diagrams. So some of you also might have seen this in the first webinar. As you can see that in the F diagrams, there are different pathways or routes, and all pathway and routes are begin all with the letter F. And these pathways is showing how diarrhea causing microorganisms can take from feces to feces. And in particular, actually, you don't need much. So for example, the most common cause of diarrheal disease in young children is rotavirus. And it only needs less than 100 virus particles to cause a diarrheal disease in the young children. And do you know how many rotavirus that can be present in just 1 gram of feces? Maybe someone can, do you know how much or how many rotavirus particles in 1 gram of feces? Is about 10 trillions and only need 100 particles to cause you diarrheal disease. And F diagram also show how actually we can stop the transmission of disease. There is a primary barriers and the secondary barriers. Barrier can stop the transmission of disease, and this can be for the primary barriers that we prevent initial contacts with feces, and for the second barrier, we prevent the feces for being ingested by a new person. And this is why all the WASH components are really important. So primary barrier and secondary barriers, you can also see that the water supply, sanitations, and hygiene promotions can stop the transmissions of diarrheal disease. And why multiple barrier is important? Let's have a look this illustration at the Swiss cheese models. So there are so many holes in one barriers. So even though no approach will guarantee 100% protection all the times, it has been demonstrated that the most effective way keeping drinking water clean and safe is to implement multi-barrier approach. And the multi-barrier approach can be physical and also can be a software component or a behavior controls. And at the same time also, it's similar that we are also talking a multi-barrier approach when it comes to water treatment. As you can see here, that after each treatment option, there is an increasing level of removal pathogens. So combining different types of treatment will improve the effectiveness and removal of pathogens. As I mentioned before, that a multi-barrier approach can improve removal and can improve the effectiveness of treatments. And for the household water treatment systems, it involves 4 stages. So first is sedimentations, filtrations, disinfections, and safe storage of treated water. And all these options for the household water treatment is relatively low cost and is a simple options. And it depends also on what's suited with the local context. So before we go to the treatment systems or the treatment process, there are several steps that we can try to minimize level of contaminations. And by doing this, we can increase the effectiveness of subsequent treatment process. For example, so before we are even talking about the treatment system, we can think how actually we can better protect our water source. There are different, as you might also know, that there are different ways how we can protect our water source. So for example, it's a moving latrines away from the water source and downstream, and we locate it downstream of the water source. We regular cleans the area around the water source. We can also build fences to prevent animals from getting into open water source. Lining wells to prevent surface water from contaminating the groundwater. And there are so many other ways how we can protect a water source. And if you have an experience regarding how you protect the water source, please type into the chat box, and we would love to hear more real-life experience how you can protect the water source. And another things that we can do to improve a water supply even before we are doing a treatment process is to strain the water. And this is an important step. And if done correctly, it will improve the effectiveness of all methods. And all these methods will be mentioned in the next slide. And how do we choose a treatment methods? Of course, that the choice is really depend on the locations and the nature of emergency. There will be no one right answer or perfect solutions. And what is important to consider is what are people used to, what are their existing practice, and people, what are the existing practice, and also because if we are introducing a new method in emergency situations, it requires high quality training. So it should always based on people know how and also people experience. During the emergency operation, sometimes the only choice for the water treatment system is what is available at the moment. This is some questions that you can ask. How to choose the best course of actions. The most important things for our intervention is that the people using the method or product must want to use it. SPEAR handbook also has this kind of decision tree and is adapted also from our IFRC field manual on household water treatment and storage in emergency. We have already talked a little bit about the multi-barrier approach, and we've already a little bit also mentioned regarding different options. Let's talk now about the sedimentation. So sedimentation is a physical treatment process allowing the dirt to fall to the bottom of the water containers over time or can also be achieved through the addition of chemicals. There are two kinds of chemicals, a synthetic chemicals and also a natural coagulants. For these sedimentations, it is important to keep in mind that the water that has been made clear by sedimentation still not safe to drink. It is still needs to be disinfected to remove disease-causing germs. However, this process can make disinfection more effective on the later stage. If you see from the slide, one way to do a physical sedimentation is using 3-pot methods. These three pot methods can reduce dirt and disease-causing germs by storing water in the containers. So allowing dirt to settle and moving cleaner water to different containers over time. If you want to know more detail regarding these methods, you can go ahead and download the IFRC household water treatment and storage field manual. But just to give you some brief idea, so that these 3-pot methods that we always take water from the pot number 3. If you see from the pictures, the pot number 3 has the cleanest water. And the pot number 1 is always the dirtiest water. So it means that you drink from pot number 3. And in order to improve its quality, like I mentioned also before, that the straining waters through a cloud can increase the effectiveness of subsequent treatment process. And another good tips is to wash the cloth between uses. The 3-pot method is a good interim process. It's a good interim measures that can be adopted during emergency until the mass distribution of other methods is possible or the quality of the source is improved. Why? Because it is low cost, simple and easy, although on the negative side is also time intensive, and again it's only removes turbidity and pathogens partially. And if you don't have 3 containers, or the affected populations do not have 3 containers, this method also can work by using 2 containers. But then in this case, we should allow more time for the dirt to settle and disease-causing germs to die. This is all the physical sedimentation. Alternatively, we can use a chemical or a coagulant to speed up the sedimentations. So this chemical will encourage settlement of suspended particles, forming larger particles which precipitate, which can be then removed by settling or filtration. For the international federations, we commonly use chlorine tablets for household disinfection in emergency. And The example of chemical coagulants are water maker or pour sachet. We have also aluminum sulfate, polyaluminum chloride, or ferric sulfate. Some of you might know that water maker and pour sachet are the example of combination of chemicals. So that not only having a coagulant, but also having a disinfectant. So therefore, once the water is treated, as per the instructions on this package, it will be ready for consumption. It is precisely this reason why these chemicals are quite handy, particularly in the floods emergency response, because they remove dirt and also disinfect water at the same time. There is also a natural coagulant, and this usually is a tropical plant, and there are two that I can mention here is moringa seed or prickly pear cactus. And the use of these natural ingredients is a local practice, and this is not a new idea, or this is not a new invention. And there are various studies have shown that moringa seed, for example, are an effective biocoagulant to improve physical and chemical properties of contaminated water. And in this study also, it has been recommended for the use of moringa seed as a coagulant in developing countries. But of course, it also depends whether this country has a moringa seed or prickly pear cactus. Let's have a look at the difference between the 3-pot methods and the chemical sedimentation plus disinfection. So the good things for the 3-pot method, it can reduce dirt and disease-causing germs in waters. However, like already mentioned before, it does not totally remove disease-causing germs. So we still need to have disinfections to completely remove disease risk. So disinfection can be using we can use a boiling, a chemical disinfections, or solar disinfections. And what about for the chemical sedimentation? So the good things, it can make dirty water safe to drink, especially if you have a disinfection at the same time. And the disinfection aspect of chemical sedimentation has a residual effect, and it gives some protection against contamination after the treatments. But not so good things, of course, is more complicated to use. And these chemical sedimentations requires more training and follow-up. And in some countries, these chemicals might not be available. We are mentioned regarding coagulant, and actually how does it work? So the main objective of this coagulant process, so the coagulations destabilize the particle charges. So the coagulant which usually has an opposite charges to the suspended solid that is suspended in the water, are added to neutralize the negative charge of dispersed non-settable solid, and usually is such as clay or organic substance. So once the charge in the water is neutralized, the small suspended particles are capable of sticking together. And the slightly larger particles formed to this process, we call it a microflux. And during the coagulation process, we are also doing a continuous high energy rapid mixing. And this process promotes collision, which is needed to achieve good coagulation and formation of the microflux. So the collision of the microflux particle will cause them to bond to produce larger and visible flux. And the flux size will build through additional collision, and eventually it will form a macroflux. So it will reach its optimum size and strength, and finally it will settle to the bottom. And the tips to explain on the coagulation process, or to demonstrate a coagulation process, is to use a clear buckets, so that it will allow people to see how the product is working. And of course, the method can be improved by using a straining cloth when we pour the water into containers. And for the next slide, so I will pass the presentation to Wendy.
And thanks, Vira. Okay, so to quickly continue from the slides that were explained by Vira on sedimentation and coagulation, the next process in terms of household water treatment would be filtration. So as some of us would be familiar, there are several types of filters that can remove dirt from the water by physically blocking them while letting water flow through. And now, water passes through a material such as sand or ceramic, and harmful material is caught in the filter. Although filters are not commonly used in emergencies, there have been instances where ceramic filters have been distributed during emergency operations. One of the real-life example would be that some ceramic filters were in fact distributed during the Vietnam flood operations in late 2016. And going back to the messages that we keep on emphasizing, it is very context specific, and therefore please find out whether it is suitable to be used in that specific situation. There are several ways to carry out filtration. So as we can see on the slide, there is cloth filter, sand filter, biosand filter, and ceramic pot filter. So let's start with cloth filter. So of course, for cloth filter, the higher the thread count for the cloth means that the more closely weaved the cloth is, which means that it will be better to filter the water. Now, studies have shown that if we fold sari cloth, which is common in some South Asian countries, into 4 layers, this would reduce the number of bacteria significantly in water by 90%. And even if it's only 2 to 3 layers, it was found that it is approximately equally effective. This simple method, as we can imagine, were used by village women, in this case in Matlab, Bangladesh, to filter pond and river water. Now, this field study found that using sari cloth as a filter, it is not only a way that was accepted by the villagers and sustained by the villagers, but it reduced the cholera percent. If you're interested to know the literature review for this, you can contact me directly. For sand filter, it is done through filtration through sand, which is a fast and simple pre-treatment option that reduces the amount of dirt in water and makes disinfection more effective. So water is poured from one container through a container of sand with gravel and an opening or spigot at the bottom of the container. And then the water will flow into a water storage container. As for biosand filter, it is an effective and long-lasting method of household water treatment. It uses sand and biological that grows on top of the filter. And of course, in this case, the filter will need to be cleaned when it becomes clogged. Also note that because it is a biological layer, it needs time to grow after each washing. So please note that after each cleaning or washing, the filter will not be able to treat water properly when first put into use. So you will need some time to develop the biological layer again. For ceramic pot filter, it is usually made of clay mixed with combustible material like sawdust, fired at approximately 860 degrees Celsius afterwards. So this firing would cause leaving small cracks and pores that are large enough to allow water to pass through, but it is too small for bacteria and protozoa to do so. After firing the filters, they are soaked in water to test for leaks and then subjected to a flow test. It should be between 1 to 3 liters per hour of flow rate. An additional safeguard in the biosand filter would be the application of a small amount of colloidal silver, both on the inside and outside of the filter. When properly manufactured and used, these filters, they can strain 99.99% bacteria in water, and in normal use, filters should be effective for at least 2 years. Next one would be the ceramic pot filter. So similarly, this filter, hold on, yeah, let me go to the next, yeah. So in the ceramic candle filter, these are simple devices that are made of clay, and they are able to remove turbidity, suspended materials, and pathogens. Removal happens through a physical process, which is a mechanical trapping and adsorption on the ceramic candles, which have micro-scale pores. Water is poured into the upper container and flows through the candle. Water passes through the candle and is then collected in the lower container, as we can see on the slide, where the part containing safe water or clean water. If possible, filters should be boiled to kill germs that can cause diseases that are caught in the filter. And the last one is a membrane filter. It is a thin layer of semi-permeable material that separates substances when a driving force is applied across the membrane. It is available in a wide range of pore sizes used to remove bacteria, microorganisms, particulates, and natural organic materials. Synthetic polymer. So we might be familiar with certain membrane filters from operations, or even in our own homes, we use filters. Some of the membrane processes are microfiltration, ultrafiltration, nanofiltration, and reverse osmosis. You might also hear filters like live straw or sky juice, which uses membrane filters. A recent example would be the distribution of live straw community filters, which are higher capacity, which were distributed to selected flood-affected schools in India in late 2017. So again, this might be suitable in the case of India, but it might not be in other countries, and therefore it is very context specific. So now, after going through the different types of filters, you may be wondering what are some of the advantages and disadvantages of each of these filters. So on the screen, it is a rather wordy slide. So I'm just going to give a few seconds for everyone to read through the differences, the pros and cons of each of the filtration types. I will not go through each point in detail, but please, in your own time, go through this slide and the subsequent slide. So I'm just going to give a few seconds for the audience to read through this slide. So we can see the differences, the pros and cons of cloth filter, sand filter, and biosand filter. So I'm sure some of them we already know in terms of the limitations and the advantages. And similarly, pros and cons of ceramic pot filter, ceramic candle filter, and the membrane filter, as we went through just now. So again, please go through in your own time. If you have any questions, please let us know. Okay, so after looking at and learning about sedimentation and filtration, now let's move on to disinfection. All right, now there are several types to disinfect water. As we can see in the slide, there is boiling, there is solar disinfection or SODIS, and there is the chemical method to disinfect water. Now, disinfection can often affect the taste of water. For example, boiling will leave water tasting flat or tasteless. Solar will make water hot, and chemicals can leave a bad taste, which I'm sure some of us have heard or experienced before in our day-to-day job or during emergency operations. And therefore, it is very important to talk to people who are using these methods to ensure that whatever methods that we bring to the table or we introduce to them would be adopted and would be acceptable by them, and that they continue to use this method to treat water. So for boiling, it is a traditional method of treating water, and if done properly, it can provide safe water to a population that has limited or no alternatives. For boiling to work, water must be brought to a rolling, bubbling boil. Now, boiling, as we can imagine, have positive and negative aspects. Boiling will kill all disease-causing germs, and it is something that people can do themselves. However, the disadvantages will be that it takes a kilogram of firewood to boil 1 liter of water for 1 minute. Therefore, it shouldn't be promoted in areas where wood is scarce. Boiling also has no residual effect. Therefore, improper storage can lead to recontamination. And therefore, boiled water should be stored safely and used within a few days. Boiling also makes water taste flat or tasteless. So a tip to remedy this would be to shake water in a bottle or adding a pinch of salt for each liter of water boiled. The next method of disinfection is SODIS, solar disinfection. It is a way to expose water to sunlight where it will destroy most of the disease-causing germs. One easy way to expose is to expose plastic or glass bottles of water to the sun. In tropical countries, a safe exposure period is about 5 hours. And usually it is done at midday when the sunlight is at the most exposure. Exposure time should be increased if water is cloudy or if the weather is not sufficiently sunny. Basically, this increases the temperature of the water by placing it under direct sunlight. Now, in some cases, if water bottle is not available, this can be replaced with a clean and clear plastic bag. So a few tips to speed up the process we can fill the bottle about 3/4 full of water and then shake it, then fill it up and expose to sunlight. Sporadic shaking during exposure will also help the process. Advantages and disadvantages. So with any method, there are pros and cons. Advantages is that it will kill most disease-causing germs if exposed to the sun long enough. It is also something that people can do on their own. But unfortunately, so this has no residual effect. So similar to boiling, we need to ensure proper storage of water to eliminate recontamination of water. And it should be safely stored and used up within a few days. So this also takes more time than other methods and requires sunny weather for a prolonged period of time. Okay, so for the last method that we will cover for disinfection is chemical disinfection, where we use chemicals that are capable of disinfecting water. And these chemicals vary in the effectiveness and the level of safety. For the International Federation, we commonly use chlorine tablets for household water disinfection during emergencies. And again, it has to be emphasized that it is important to make sure all people who receive these chemicals are trained on how to use them. So therefore, no distribution without training. Also, please remember and note that we have to ensure the instructions that we give to them in terms of how to use any chemicals will be in a language that they are familiar with, either verbally or written. So chemical disinfection is not as efficient when used with dirty or cloudy water. So therefore, if you see that the water looks dirty or cloudy, we would recommend to use double dose of the chemical. When possible, ask for feedback from those that have used the chemicals. By doing this, you'll be able to know whether the product is suitable for the context, and if not, then we need to change the design of the operation. And we need to take it as a lesson learned for future operations, either by carrying out retrainings or to explore other water treatment options. There are other tips available. Please check out our IFRC field manual for household water treatment and safe storage when you have a chance to. I know that for some national societies, you have already this in your own languages. So household water treatment and safe storage cannot be complete without knowing how to properly store water. All efforts to make water clean are pointless if the water is improperly stored or handled. We need to encourage people to keep containers clean, covered, and out of reach of children. It is best to have a different container for collecting water and storing water. We have to advise people to use narrow neck containers to prevent contamination. But narrow neck containers are also quite difficult to be cleaned, and therefore we need to advise them to regularly clean the containers with a soap solution or chemical disinfectants. And in some culture, using pebbles would be suitable, whichever that is available and applicable to the situation. If only wide neck containers are available, encourage people to keep them covered and design a system in such a way you don't have to dip your hands or come in contact with the water, such as using a long ladle or having a tap or spigot at the bottom of the container. Again, encourage them to wash regularly these containers. When distributing, for example, chlorine tablets to those affected by a disaster, we can use this as an opportunity to increase awareness on best hygiene practices, such as when to wash their hands. Household water treatment and safe storage should be targeted to the most vulnerable population, including those that are underdeveloped or impaired or with impaired immune systems, which are children under 5, the elderly, and people living with HIV/AIDS. Interrupted water supplies due to natural disasters such as flooding or those displaced by war and conflicts, and those that have high exposure to contaminated water, which can be families that rely on surface or unprotected water supplies, including those living in remote rural areas and urban slums. In addition to trying to ensure your services reach those most in need, there are several more considerations when we are rolling out a household water treatment and safe storage in emergencies. So number one would be long-term maintenance plan. We need to think of what we need to communicate to the recipients in terms of our services on possible items that need attention and care. It could be the need to consistently clean filters, to clean water containers, cloth, so on and so forth, according to the context. Our responsibility should go beyond the emergency phase and should also support an effective exit strategy. Next one is to plan the source of financial support. Think of the initial costs and also the operation cost that is involved. It is easier to get financial support to distribute filters, water purification sachet, so on and so forth during emergency phase, but we also need to think about what happens beyond that phase. For example, are the community members able to maintain them? Do they have sufficient knowledge to do so? Are they able to get more of such water purification sachet in the future after we exit from the emergency operation? As part of the assessment, we need to find out what is considered as appropriate household water treatment and safe storage options in the area that we are working at. For example, what are the channels where you can get information? Think of who you can speak in order to get an overview of the situation. What are some of the local materials that are available in the market that are suitable in terms of cultural and social context? The more you understand your targeted audience and the area that you are at, the better options that you can identify. Remember, you have to find a good balance here. Although it is crucial to understand the people and area in deciding which household water treatment and safe storage options you should go for, time is also of essence. It is hoped that the more we engage with affected communities, the higher the chances of us trying to create ownership among the recipients of our services. Now, what should we monitor when we do or roll out such a program? A few indicators to consider, which include number of products distributed, number of people trained, such as how many people or how many promoters that we train, how many technicians and how many staff or volunteers, number of education materials distributed, and number of household visits conducted. As we can see, these are all quite quantitative figures, but of course, it should be more than these numbers. Don't stop with counting these indicators, but also we should consider other numbers, qualitative numbers, which we can get only by talking and consulting with the recipients of our services. Household water treatment is only effective if they are actually making safe water. So the correct use of any product distributed needs to be checked and assessed. Okay, so after going through all the slides, of course, there are more resources available. For example, would be the household water treatment and safe storage in emergencies, which are downloadable at Watson Mission Assistant. So please visit this website, which has a lot more materials besides those that we see on this slide. There is also a module on household water treatment on the learning platform, and also the Sphere Handbook, which has relevant standards on household water treatment, and also other indicators in the wash sector. So that brings us to the end of the week.